Hello, I'm going to be reading The Hazelwood today, chapter 1. So, yeah, that's what the plan is. I'm starting on my copy, page 2. It is chapter 1, My Mother, is how it started. My mother was raised on fairy tales, but I was raised on highways. My first memory is the smell of hot pavement and the sky through the sunroof, whipping by the river of blue. My mom tells me that's impossible. Our car doesn't have a sunroof. But I can still close my eyes and see it, so I'm holding on to it. We've crossed the country 100 times. In our beater car that smells like french fries and stale coffee and plasticky strawberries from the day I fed my Tinkerbell lipstick into the slats of the heater vents. We stayed in so many places with so many people that I never really learned the concept of stranger danger, which is why when I was 6 years old I got into a blue Buick with a redhead man I'd never met and drove with him for 14 hours straight, plus 2 stops for the bathroom and 1 for pancakes, before the cops pulled us over, tipped off by a waitress who recognized my description from the radio. By then, I'd figured out the man wasn't who he said he was. A friend of my grandmother, Althea, taking me to see her. Althea was already seduced by her big house. Then I'd never met her. She had no friends, just fans, and my mother told me that's what the man was, a fan who wanted to use me to get to my grandma. After they determined I hadn't been assaulted, after the redhead man was identified as a drifter who'd stolen a car a few miles from the place we were staying in Utah, my mother decided we'd never talk about it again. We didn't want to hear it. Then I told her the man was kind, that he told me stories and had a warm laugh that made me believe deep in my 6-year-old heart he was actually my father come to claim me. He'd been shown a redhead man in custody through a one-way mirror and swore she'd never seen him before. For a few years, I'd persisted in believing he was my dad. When they left Utah after his arrest to live for a few months in an artist's retreat outside of Tempe, I worried he wouldn't be able to find me again. He never did. By the time I turned 9, I'd recognized my secret belief for what it was, a child's fantasy. I folded it away I did all the things I didn't need. Old toys, bedtime superstitions, clothes that didn't fit. My mom and I lived like vagrants, staying with friends till our welcome wore through at the elbows, perching in precarious places, then moving on. We did have the luxury of being nostalgic. We didn't have a chance to stand still until the year I turned 17 and Althea died in Hazelwood. When my mother Ella got the letter, a shudder ran through her. That was before she opened it. The envelope was a creamy green, printed with her name and address on the place we were staying. We'd arrived the night before, and I wondered how it found us. She pulled an ivory letter opener from the table beside her, because we were house-sitting for a kind of people who kept bits of murdered elephant around for show. With shaking hands, she split the envelope jaggedly through the middle. Her nails, polished, were so red it looked like she'd cut herself. As she shook it out, the letter caught the light, so I could see the black text through the back, but couldn't read them. Ella made a sound I didn't recognize, a gasp of complicated pain that cut breath off clean. She held the paper so close to her face, it colored her skin a faint celery green, her mouth moving as she read it through again. Then she crumpled the letter up and tossed it into the trash. We weren't supposed to smoke inside the place, a cramped apartment on New York Upper West Side that smelled like expensive French soap and wet Yorkies. But Ella pulled out a cigarette anyway and lit it off an antique crystal lighter. She sucked in smoke like it was a milkshake, tapping the fingers on one hand again, the heavy green stone she wore at the pulse of her throat. My mother's dead, she said on an exhale and coughed. The news hit me with a depth charge, the knot of pain in my stomach that kept expanding. But it had been a long time since I'd spent an hour with dreaming of Althea. The news shouldn't have hurt me at all. Ella squatted down in front of me. She put her hands on my knees. Her eyes were shiny but dry. This isn't, forgive me, but this isn't a bad thing. It's not. It could change things for us. It could. Her voice cracked in half before she could finish. She put her head down on my knees and sobbed once. It was a desolate sound that belonged somewhere else. Out there with dark roads and dead leaf smells, not in this bright room in the middle of a loud, bright city. Then I kissed the crown of her hair and smelled like dinner coffee, and the smoke twining up from her cigarette. She breathed in, out, and turned her face up to look at me. Do you know what this means for us? I stared at her, then around at the room we were sitting in, rich and stuffy and somebody else's. Wait, does this mean we get the Hazelwood? My grandparents' estate, which I'd only seen in photos, felt like a place I remembered from some alternate imaginary childhood. One where I rode horses and went to summer camp. It was the daydream I disappeared into when I needed a break from the endless cycle of highways and new schools and the smell of unfamiliar houses. I'd paced myself into its distant world of fountains and hedges, highballs and pools, so glittering bright you had to squint against it. But my mother's bony hand was around my wrist, pulling me out of the technicolored lawns of Hazelwood. God, no, never. This means we're free. Free of what? I asked stupidly, but she didn't answer. She stood, tossing her half-smoked cigarette into the trash, right on top of the letter, and walked straight back out of the room like there was something she had to do. When she was gone, I poured cold coffee on the trash can fire and pulled out the wet letter. Parts of it were eaten into ash, but I flattened the soggy remainder against my knees. The type was as dense and oddly spaced as the text on the old telegram. The letter didn't seem new. It was not like it had been sent from the past. I could imagine someone typing it on an old Celtric, like the one that Fran always Sagan postcard I hung up over my bed in every place we stayed. I breathed in the scent of ash and powdery perfume, and I scanned what was left. There wasn't much of it. We send our condolences and come at your earliest. And one marooned word in a seamed paper. Alice. My name. I couldn't read anything that came before or after. I saw no other reference to myself. I dropped the wet mess into the trash. Yep, that's the first chapter. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Love you 3000, and please stay safe. Bye, guys.